Welcome to DEFCON 3. I'm KT McFarland. Concern is growing in the U.S. over Beijing's increased control over the South China Sea. As the Chinese build man-made islands in the region to boost their military presence, American officials are looking to push back at China's advances. Here with reaction are Karen Brooks from the Council on Foreign Relations and Timothy Heath from the global policy think tank, RAND Corporation. Welcome to both of you. Let me turn first to you, Tim. We've seen an uptick in activity, military activity from the United States, the Chinese, others in the region. Are we about to have a military incident in the South China Sea?
Well, KT, I think we can rule out military attacks or incidents of a deliberate nature, but the risk is growing that a miscalculation on the part of either China or any of the other rival claimants could escalate into a situation nobody wants. This is something that I think is what is of greatest concern to all sides, including the U.S. and Chinese leadership.
Well, Karen, let me turn to you. What are the Chinese up to? What do they think they're going to get by expanding their military presence in the South China Sea?
Well, KT, I think it's worth noting that the conflict in the South China Sea is not something new. In fact, the Chinese have been claiming more or less the entirety of the South China Sea since as far back as the 1950s. What is new is that this sort of more muscular and nationalistic China of recent years does seem determined to change the facts on the ground in such a way as to strengthen their claims in perpetuity. A couple of things in recent years, I think, have accelerated the Chinese determination to do this. One would be the U.S. so-called pivot to Asia. Another would be that countries such as the Philippines and Vietnam have been increasingly resistant to the Chinese claims, and the Philippines in particular has filed a case at the UN Tribunal on the International Law of the Sea to push back on China's claim to the entirety of the South China Sea. So it seems that China wants to change the facts on the ground in advance of any UN ruling in the Philippines' favor.
Let me turn back to you, Tim. China's the biggest country, biggest military. It's got a major stake in the region. Can't they kind of get whatever they want in the South China Sea?
Well, that certainly seems to be the Chinese calculation. They have the money, they've got the resources, they've got the military, and they feel that they've got the carrots in the form of trade deals and economic initiatives that can convince the countries in Southeast Asia to go along with what China wants to do. However, I think the Chinese are finding that their path to consolidate and control the South China Sea is not going to move along perhaps as smoothly as they had hoped. Vietnam is purchasing weapon systems, as is Philippines, as are many countries in that region. They are alarmed by the Chinese behavior, and they're also strengthening relations with the U.S. So this is becoming a complicating factor for China, and I think they are slowing down at least for a few weeks up to the lead up of the President Xi and President Obama summit to try and cool things off before likely resuming the construction activity after the presidents meet.
Well, Karen, let me turn to you. I mean, how powerful are the other countries in the region? Tim talked about American allies. You know, we have Vietnam, we have Philippines, we have Japan, even as far north as South Korea. But what happens in the region? Can any of those countries stand up to the Chinese?
Well, look, I think as Tim noted, this isn't a U.S. problem per se. There are 5 claimants in the South China Sea with overlapping claims. There's Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, Brunei, and Taiwan, for that matter, all have overlapping claims. And in the East China Sea, of course, China has a separate set of issues on maritime boundary disputes with Japan. So there are a number of different countries that are involved in this dispute. Certainly militarily, as Tim rightly noted, I mean, China is the 8,000-pound gorilla. It is the second largest economy in the world. It has one of the world's fastest growing militaries. And the Chinese leadership has made clear that it has ambitions for the PLA, not only to have regional power projection capability, but in fact global reach. So it's not realistic to imagine that any of the individual countries would be in a position to stand up to China militarily. Mm-hmm. The opportunity for the United States, and I think the imperative for the United States, is to build a stronger coalition among the countries that have these overlapping claims and issues in order to have more of a collective voice in pushing back on China's ambitions.
I want to ask you both one final question, and I'm going to turn to you first, Tim. What is America's interest in this region? Why do we care?
KT, America has two important interests. First off, America has a strong interest in seeing peace and stability throughout the region. We have stated repeatedly that the United States takes no position on the actual territorial disputes. However, we have a very strong interest in seeing that those disputes are resolved peacefully. The behavior by the Chinese is a challenge to that, in that they are destabilizing the situation by building these artificial islands in so rapid amount of time and militarizing those facilities. The second important interest the U.S. has is that we have a very critical interest and stake in the freedom of movement throughout the South China Sea. This is a major artery through which a lot of commercial traffic for the United States passes through, as well as our military vessels and aircraft in carrying out operations throughout the Indian Ocean. So the U.S. has a very strong interest in making sure that these seas remain free and open for all countries to use. The behavior by the Chinese in describing these waters as territorial waters is a challenge to that, and this is an issue for the United States.
Okay, Karen, I'm going to give you the last word. Why do we care?
Thank you. Well, I think Tim's got it exactly right. China's unprecedented race to change the facts on the ground, if you will, in waters through which some $5+ trillion of commerce flows every year is creating a lot of anxiety in the U.S. and for good reason. Freedom of navigation is absolutely critical, and any significant escalation between the U.S. and China, and or between the Chinese and its neighbors, could have a very serious impact on the still fragile global economy, or worse.
Well, thank you both, Karen Brooks and Timothy Heath. Now check out foxnews.com for more on China. I'm KT McFarland. Thanks for watching DEF CON 3.